Corrupt Judge mocks Karoline Leavitt in court. Minutes later, two police cars enter the courtroom. The sound of a man's life being destroyed echoed through Courtroom 7B of the Suffolk County Courthouse exactly 6 months ago. It wasn't a gunshot or a scream, just a sharp crack of Judge Raymond Thornton's gavel as he sentenced Danny Leavitt, a 19-year-old college sophomore with no prior record, to 10 years in Westland Correctional Facility for possessing 2 ounces of marijuana. "Please, Your Honor," the boy had begged, his voice breaking. "I made a mistake. I've never been in trouble before." Judge Thornton had merely smirked, adjusted his gold cufflinks, and declared, "The sentence stands. Perhaps you'll learn the value of following the law during your stay at Westland." Karoline Leavitt had sat in the back row that day, watching her baby brother collapse into tears. She'd promised their dying father she would protect Danny. She had failed until today. Today, the same gavel struck wood as Karoline Leavitt stood before Judge Raymond Thornton as a prosecutor, not a spectator. The packed courtroom fell silent. This was her 3rd appearance in Commonwealth v. Parker, and the judge's hostility had grown more pronounced with each hearing. The clock on the wall read 9:17 a.m. By 9:30, everything would change. Karoline straightened, her navy suit jacket, attempting to slow her racing heart. At 32, she'd built a reputation as one of the district attorney's most successful prosecutors, with a conviction record that made defense attorneys nervous when they saw her name on their case files. But here, in this courtroom, before this judge, none of that seemed to matter. The room itself felt oppressive, despite its grand design. Ornate oak paneling lined the walls beneath high ceilings adorned with crown molding. American and state flags stood rigidly behind the judge's bench. 8 rows of spectator benches stretched toward the back, each worn smooth by decades of anxious observers. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the room and highlighting the dust particles dancing in the air. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Thornton drawled, his steel-gray eyes fixed on her with thinly veiled contempt. "Once again you appear before me with these creative interpretations of constitutional law." The familiar knot of anger tightened in Karoline's stomach. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning that made the wooden benches creak with cold. She'd prepared for this moment for half a year, but now that it had arrived, her mouth felt dessert dry. Karoline gripped her legal pad tighter, knuckles whitening. She'd worked too hard to get where she was to be spoken to like an amateur. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the precedent in Commonwealth v. Blackwell clearly supports Ms. Leavitt." The judge's gavel came down with unnecessary force, causing several jurors to flinch. The 12 men and women who had been selected after 3 days of questioning looked increasingly uncomfortable with the judge's obvious animosity. "I did not ask for another one of your lectures. Perhaps if you spent less time on television, commenting on legal matters, and more time studying actual law, you wouldn't embarrass yourself in my courtroom." The gallery erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Several reporters scribbled furiously in notepads. This case had attracted media attention not for its facts, a straightforward assault charge against a mid-level drug dealer named James Parker, but for the increasingly bizarre behavior of Judge Thornton toward the prosecutor. Karoline's face burned. Everyone in the room knew what this was about. Her recent television appearances criticizing corrupt judicial appointments had clearly touched a nerve, but she'd never named Judge Thornton specifically, though rumors about his connections to certain property developers had circulated for years. "Your Honor, I move for denied." Thornton cut her off with a wave of his hand. His Harvard ring glinted in the light. "In fact, let me make this interesting." He leaned back, his black robe rustling as he crossed his arms. "Tell me, Ms. Leavitt, did you even pass criminal procedure? Or did you just bat those pretty eyelashes to get your degree?" A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney, Mark Denholm, shifted uncomfortably beside his client. Even he appeared shocked by the judge's inappropriate comment. At 58, Denholm was a courtroom veteran who had seen almost everything in his 30 years of practice. But not this. The defendant, James Parker, smirked openly. A 30-year-old with a shaved head and arms covered in prison tattoos. He had been caught on video assaulting a rival drug dealer. It should have been an easy conviction. But nothing had been easy in Judge Thornton's courtroom. Karoline's blood boiled, but her voice remained steady. 6 months of preparation had taught her control. I graduated top of my class at Boston University Law School, Your Honor. My academic credentials are a matter of public record. She felt the eyes of her assistant, Ben Zhang, on her from the prosecution table. Ben was fresh out of law school, brilliant but inexperienced. She had insisted he join her today, despite his concerns about Judge Thornton's growing reputation for erratic behavior. You need to see what the job really involves sometimes. She had told him that morning, not everything they teach in law school, yet here you are, the judge continued, making arguments a first-year law student would be embarrassed to present. His voice dripped with condescension. Perhaps we should check if your law license is as legitimate as your evidence. In this case, the bailiff, Officer Tom Riley, looked down at his shoes, a 20-year veteran of the court. Riley had seen judges lose their tempers, seen them make questionable rulings, but never had he witnessed this level of personal attack on an attorney especially. Not a prosecutor. The court reporter's fingers hovered uncertainly over her stenotype machine, as if she was afraid to create an official record of the judge's words. In the gallery, Eleanor Martinez from the Boston Globe exchanged glances with Jeffrey Wong from Channel 5 News. Martinez mouthed, "Are you getting this?" Wong nodded slightly, his cameraman forbidden from filming, but taking detailed notes. What no one in the courtroom knew what Karoline had kept hidden for 6 months was that she wasn't just a prosecutor appearing before Judge Thornton by chance. After her brother's sentencing, she had requested to be assigned to Thornton's courtroom whenever possible. She had watched him, studied him, noticed his patterns. On rainy Tuesday afternoons, he always disappeared for appointments that coincided with meetings of the Board of Westland Private Corrections Corporation, though his name appeared nowhere in their official documents. When certain defense attorneys suggested their clients serve time at Westland rather than state facilities, sentences were mysteriously reduced, and young men from poorer neighborhoods, like her brother Danny, received sentences 3 times harsher than those from affluent communities for identical offenses, especially if they were sent to Westland. Karoline had begun compiling records, sentencing disparities, financial documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests, property records, tax filings, bank statements from offshore accounts traced through painstaking investigation. She'd worked nights and weekends building a case in secret. 2 months ago, she'd taken her evidence to Special Agent Robert Chen at the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. He had been skeptical at first, but became increasingly alarmed as he verified her findings. "This is bigger than you realize," he had told her. "We've had suspicions about judicial corruption in this district for years, but never enough solid evidence to move forward." But the FBI investigation moved slowly, methodically. Meanwhile, her brother Danny was serving his time at Westland, where phone calls cost $5 per minute and visits were limited to once a month. Due to facility policies, their mother, once vibrant and healthy, had developed high blood pressure and anxiety that kept her awake most nights. Last week, Danny had called with a black eye and a broken voice. "There are guards here who make extra money letting certain inmates access others," he had whispered. "I don't know how much longer I can." The call had cut off. The next day, Westland reported Danny had been placed in administrative segregation for his own protection and would have no phone privileges for 30 days. That was when Karoline knew she couldn't wait any longer. Her attention snapped back to the present as Judge Thornton addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you must witness this display of incompetence, but perhaps it serves as a reminder of the importance of our legal system and the standards to which we must hold those who work within it." Several jurors looked distinctly uncomfortable. Juror number 5, an elementary school teacher, frowned openly at the judge. Juror number 8, a retired postal worker, shook his head slightly. Karoline glanced at her watch. 9:25 a.m. Her phone vibrated silently in her pocket. The agreed-upon signal from Agent Chen. They were in position. "Your Honor," she said, reaching into her briefcase, "since you've questioned my competence so publicly, I'd like to submit a new motion for the record." Judge Thornton rolled his eyes. theatrical in his disdain. More paperwork to clutter my chambers. Fine, approach, as Karoline walked forward with the sealed manila envelope. She felt the weight of 6 months of investigation in her hands. This was for Danny, for their mother, for every defendant who had faced Thornton's corruption. She passed the defense table, where Mark Denholm watched her with sudden interest. His client, Parker, whispered something that made him frown and shake his head in warning. The polished hardwood floor creaked slightly under her heels as she approached the bench. Through the tall windows that flanked the courtroom, she noticed something unusual: flashing lights, red and blue. 2 police cruisers had pulled up outside the courthouse steps. "Your motion, Ms. Leavitt," Judge Thornton demanded, extending his hand impatiently. Karoline handed him the envelope, maintaining eye contact. "This is a formal complaint with evidence of judicial misconduct, Your Honor, including documentation of your financial ties to Westland Private Corrections Corporation and your pattern of sentencing young defendants to that facility at 3 times the rate of any other judge in this district." The color drained from Judge Thornton's face. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. His eyes, always cold, now filled with something new: fear. "What kind of stunt is this?" he hissed, low enough that only she could hear. "I've already filed copies with the Judicial Conduct Commission, the State Attorney General, and the FBI." Karoline continued quietly. "They're executing search warrants on your financial records as we speak." For a moment, the courtroom seemed to freeze in time. The ornate clock on the wall ticked loudly. A pencil dropped somewhere in the gallery. The court reporter's fingers remained suspended above her machine. Then Judge Thornton recovered, a mask of judicial authority sliding back into place. "Ms. Leavitt, you are dangerously close to contempt. Return to your table immediately." But Karoline stood her ground. "You should know that the envelope contains only the executive summary. The full evidence includes records of wire transfers from Sentinel Holdings, your shell company, showing payments of $5,000 per inmate sentenced to Westland. It includes records of your meetings with Westland executives dating back 5 years. It includes testimony from 3 former clerks about cases you reassigned to yourself when defendants faced potential Westland sentences." The judge's face contorted with rage. "Bailiff, remove Ms. Leavitt from my courtroom immediately." Officer Riley hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the order. "Now," Thornton shouted. The courtroom doors swung open, for law enforcement officers too. Local police and 2 suited FBI agents entered and stood at the back. Agent Chen nodded almost imperceptibly at Karoline. The judge's expression hardened as he realized what was happening. His eyes darted toward the side door that led to his chambers. "This court is in recess," he snapped, rising suddenly from the bench. "Clear the courtroom immediately." But it was too late. "Your Honor," Karoline said, raising her voice slightly so the entire courtroom could hear. "When you sentenced my brother to 10 years for a minor first offense, you told him he needed to learn about consequences. I've spent every day since then making sure you'd learn about them too." The judge froze. "Your brother? What are you talking about?" "Daniel Leavitt, sentenced 6 months ago. 2 ounces of marijuana, no prior record. You gave him 10 years at Westland. The same sentence you've given dozens of young men from poor neighborhoods while letting wealthy defendants walk for worse crimes." Murmurs grew louder in the courtroom. Eleanor Martinez was now openly recording on her phone. Judicial prohibitions forgotten in the moment's drama. "This is absurd," Judge Thornton sputtered, but his confidence was visibly shaken. "You've built a career-ending fantasy based on some family grievance." "With respect, Your Honor," Mark Denholm said, rising from the defense table, "I'd like to request a recess and disclosure of this alleged evidence. If these accusations have merit, they directly impact my client's right to a fair trial." "Shut up, Denholm," the judge snapped. "You're as complicit as anyone. Half your clients end up at Westland with reduced sentences." The defense attorney paled. The courtroom erupted in chatter. "Order, order," Judge Thornton shouted, banging his gavel repeatedly. "This court is in recess. Everyone clear the room now." The 4 law enforcement officers moved forward slightly, but remained by the doors. This was not part of their plan. They had intended to wait until after court adjourned to approach The judge, to avoid precisely this kind of scene in the gallery. Reporters were now openly taking photos with their phones. The jurors watched in stunned silence. Defendant Parker leaned back in his chair with an amused expression, as if watching an entertaining show. Karoline returned to the prosecution table where Ben Zhang sat wide-eyed. "What's happening?" he whispered. "Is this part of the case strategy?" "Not exactly," she replied, gathering her files. "But justice sometimes requires creativity." Judge Thornton appeared to regain some composure. He adjusted his robe and addressed the courtroom with forced calm. "Due to this unprecedented disruption, court will recess for 1 hour. Ms. Leavitt, you will report to my chambers immediately to explain yourself before I file contempt charges." "I don't think that's advisable, Your Honor," Karoline replied. "Evenly, my full statement should be given in the presence of witnesses." The judge's face flushed dark red. "You dare to?" The side door to the courtroom opened, and the clerk, Jana Phillips, entered looking flustered. "Your Honor," she said urgently, "there are federal agents at your office with a search warrant." For a moment, complete silence blanketed the courtroom. Then chaos erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Spectators stood, craning their necks to see. The defendant turned to his attorney with panic in his eyes. "What about my case? What happens to me?" Judge Thornton stood frozen on the bench, his authority evaporating before everyone's eyes. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his reading glasses and folded them precisely, placing them in the breast pocket of his robe. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice now dangerously soft, "you have no idea what you've done or who you're dealing with. This little performance may satisfy your personal vendetta, but I promise you, when the dust settles, you'll regret this day for the rest of your career." Karoline met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps, Your Honor, but my brother will regret your courtroom for the rest of his life. The difference is, he did nothing to deserve it." Agent Chen approached the bench, badge in hand. "Judge Raymond Thornton, I'm Special Agent Robert Chen with the FBI. We have a warrant to search your chambers and seize electronic devices and financial records. We'd like to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into judicial corruption." The judge's eyes narrowed. "I know my rights. Agent, I'll have my attorney present for any questioning." "Of course, Your Honor," Chen replied professionally. "However, we will need to execute this search warrant immediately." The bailiff, Officer Riley, looked to the judge for instructions. Thornton gave a curt nod, and Riley announced, "All rise." Court is in recess. As people began filing out, Karoline remained at the prosecution table, watching as Judge Thornton descended from the bench with as much dignity as he could muster. Their eyes met briefly as he passed. The hatred in his gaze was palpable. "This isn't over," he murmured as he passed her table. "No," she agreed quietly, "it's just beginning." The defendant, Parker, was being led back to holding by court officers. As he passed Karoline, he said, "Damn, lady, remind me never to cross your family." Mark Denholm approached her as the courtroom emptied. "Karoline, what the hell? You could have given me some warning." "I couldn't risk it, Mark," she replied. "Not with what was at stake." "So what happens to my client now his case is compromised?" "Likely a mistrial and reassignment to another judge," Karoline said. "But given what we know about Thornton's practices, your client might benefit from a review of his case anyway." Denholm ran a hand through his silver hair. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since my brother's sentencing," she answered. "At first, it was just suspicion, but the more I dug, the more I found. Thornton has been running this scheme for years, sentenced over 300 defendants to Westland, many with excessive terms. The prison pays him through a shell company for each one. And your office knows about this operation." Karoline hesitated. "Not exactly. I've been conducting this investigation on my own time, with FBI cooperation for the past 2 months. My boss knows as of this morning." The defense attorney let out a low whistle. "You risked everything on this. Some things are worth the risk," she replied. The courtroom had nearly emptied now. Only Ben remained at the prosecution table, still, looking shell-shocked, and a few lingering reporters kept a respectful distance while obviously trying to overhear their conversation. Denholm lowered his voice. "Thornton has powerful friends, Karoline. This won't be as simple as presenting evidence and getting a conviction. People will close ranks. Records will disappear. Witnesses will suddenly develop amnesia. I know, she said. That's why I've been methodical. Digital backups in multiple locations. Sworn statements from witnesses already in the record. Bank records subpoenaed through proper channels. Still, Denholm warned, watch your back. People with money and power don't go down easily. I'm counting. On that, Karoline replied with a grim smile. The harder they fight, the more evidence they'll create. As they spoke, Agent Chen approached. Ms. Leavitt, do you have a moment? Denholm nodded a goodbye and left to check on his client. Karoline turned to the FBI agent. How did it go with the search? We're just getting started, Chen replied. But I wanted to update you. We found a safe in his private bathroom, not listed in any building plans. We're waiting for a specialist to open it. Good, Karoline said. Check for cash, offshore account information, and any correspondence with Westland executives, especially Marcus Halloway or Diana Fulton. Chen looked impressed. You've done your homework. 6 months of it, she confirmed. Any word on when we can expect the financial records from the Cayman Islands account? Court order is being processed now. Should have them by end of day. Chen hesitated. You should know Thornton made a call before we could secure his phone. Brief, less than 20 seconds, a chill ran down Karoline's spine. To whom? Number belongs to State Senator William Blackwood. Karoline closed her eyes briefly. Senator Blackwood chaired the Judiciary Committee and had personally championed Thornton's appointment to the bench 7 years ago. This complicated matters. Keep me informed, she said. And Agent Chen? The request I made regarding my brother's situation, the FBI agent nodded. We have agents at Westland as we speak, conducting interviews related to guard misconduct and inmate safety. Your brother is being moved to the medical wing under federal protection until we can arrange a transfer. Relief washed over her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Chen warned. This is just day one of what will likely be a years-long investigation and prosecution. Corruption this deep doesn't unravel quickly or cleanly. Ben approached hesitantly. Ms. Leavitt, the district attorney is calling. He wants to see you immediately. Karoline nodded. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes. She turned back to Chen. What happens next with Thornton? We interview him with his attorney present. Depending on what we find today, we may have enough for an arrest warrant, or we may need to continue building the case. Either way, I expect he'll be suspended from the bench pending investigation. And the case is all those defendants he sentenced unfairly. Chen sighed. That's complicated. Each case will need individual review. Some sentences may be vacated, others modified. It will take time. Time my brother and hundreds of others don't have, Karoline said, her voice hardening. Every day they spend in Westland is another day of their lives stolen. I understand, Chen replied, but we have to follow proper procedures, or Thornton and his allies will use any mistake to discredit the entire investigation. Karoline nodded reluctantly. She knew he was right, but the thought of Danny spending even one more night in that prison made her stomach twist. The courtroom was empty now except for them and Ben, who waited by the door. Through the windows, Karoline could see more police. Cars arriving, reporters gathering on the courthouse steps. News was spreading. I should go, she said. The DA is probably getting calls from every news outlet in the state. Chen nodded. Be careful what you say publicly. Too much detail could compromise the investigation. I know how to handle the press, she assured him as she gathered her briefcase. Karoline took one last look around the courtroom. For 6 months, this room had represented everything wrong with the justice system, the corruption, the inequality, the abuse of power. Now, perhaps, it could become a symbol of accountability. She thought of her brother, of the hope that might now be possible for him. She thought of her mother, who she needed to call immediately. She thought of all the families affected by Thornton's schemes. This was just the beginning. Senator Blackwood would use his influence to protect his protege. Westland executives would hire the best attorneys money could buy. Evidence would be challenged. Witnesses pressured, allegations minimized. The system would resist change. But, for the first time in 6 months, Karoline felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. As she walked toward the door where Ben waited, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mother. "Is it true? The news says they arrested the judge who sentenced Danny. Is there a chance?" Karoline typed back, "Not arrested yet, but investigated. There's definitely a chance. I'll explain everything tonight. I love you." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, just as another message came through, this one from an unknown number. "You've made a serious mistake. Some fights aren't worth the cost. Back off now while you still can." Karoline showed the message to Agent Chen, who frowned. "Save that. We'll trace it. You may need protection." "I'm not backing down," she said firmly. "I didn't think you would," Chen replied. "But be smart. Thornton isn't the only corrupt official in this district. We don't yet know how far this network extends." With that sobering thought, Karoline left the courtroom. The hallway was buzzing with activity, court personnel whispering in clusters, reporters trying to get statements from anyone involved, uniformed officers maintaining order. As she walked toward the elevator with Ben beside her, Karoline felt eyes on her from every direction. Some looks were admiring, others suspicious, still others openly hostile. Not everyone would celebrate the exposure of corruption. Many had benefited from it, directly or indirectly. "Ms. Leavitt," Ben said quietly as they waited for the elevator, "what you did in there, it was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen." She smiled slightly. "Sometimes they're the same thing, Ben." The elevator doors opened, revealing Eleanor Martinez from the Boston Globe. The reporter's eyes widened in recognition. "Ms. Leavitt, can you comment on the allegations against Judge Thornton? Is it true you've been building a case against him in secret? How does this relate to your brother's sentencing?" Karoline maintained her professional composure. "No comment at this time. There's an ongoing federal investigation. Sources say you confronted the judge directly in court with evidence of corruption. Can you confirm?" As I said, no comment. The elevator reached the lobby, and Karoline stepped out into the crowded atrium. More reporters converged, shouting questions. Ben tried to create a path through the crowd. Across the lobby, standing motionless amidst the chaotic activity, was a tall man in an expensive suit. Senator William Blackwood watched her with calculated intensity, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away. Flanked by aides, the message was clear. Powerful interests had been alerted. The real battle was just beginning. Outside on the courthouse steps, cameras flashed and microphones thrust toward her. Karoline kept walking, offering no comment despite the barrage of questions. Her mind was already turning to the next step: securing evidence, protecting witnesses, navigating the political pushback that would inevitably come. As she reached her car in the parking garage, Karoline took a deep breath. For the first time in 6 months, she allowed herself to fully feel the emotions she had kept carefully controlled. The anger over her brother's treatment, the satisfaction of finally confronting Thornton, the fear of retaliation, the determination to see this through no matter the cost. Her phone rang. It was her boss, District Attorney Richard Collins. "Leavitt, what the hell have you done?" he demanded without preamble. "Exposed judicial corruption that's been ongoing for years." She answered calmly, "Without authorization, without even informing me. Do you have any idea of the position you've put this office in? I have evidence of criminal behavior by a sitting judge, sir. Would you have preferred I ignore it?" Collins sighed heavily. "You know, it's not that simple. The protocols exist for a reason. The protocols would have given Thornton time to destroy evidence and silence witnesses," Karoline countered. "I did what was necessary." A long pause. "Then, my office. 15 minutes. Bring everything you have." The call ended. Karoline started her car, mentally preparing for the battle ahead. The confrontation in the courtroom had been merely the opening move. Now came the hard part: navigating the politics, the media, the legal challenges, and the threats that would surely follow. As she drove out of the parking garage, she noticed a black SUV with tinted windows pull out behind her. It could be coincidence. It could be federal agents assigned to protect her. Or it could be something else entirely. Karoline checked her mirrors, adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, and drove toward the district attorney. office, ready for whatever came next, for Danny, for justice, for all those who had suffered under the corrupt reign of Judge Thornton. The first move had been made. The game was now in motion, and Karoline Leavitt had no intention of losing. What do you think will happen next? Will Judge Thornton face justice, or will his powerful connections help him escape? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Judge Raymond Thornton's chambers had always been his sanctuary, a place where expensive bourbon was hidden in a false bottom drawer, and where he'd made countless calls to friends who could help him with his mounting gambling debts. Today, that sanctuary felt like a trap. "This is absurd," he shouted, slamming the envelope Karoline had given him onto his desk. "She's trying to destroy me because I wouldn't let her railroad my courtroom." His clerk, Jana, said nothing, eyes fixed on the doorway where the FBI agents now stood. Judge Thornton, the female agent, said, "I'm Special Agent Marissa Patel. We have a warrant to seize electronic devices and financial records from your chambers and residence." Outside in the hallway, court employees whispered and stared. News traveled fast in courthouses. Back in the now empty courtroom, Karoline sat alone at the prosecutor's table, hands shaking as the adrenaline rush faded. She hadn't planned for the confrontation to happen today, but when the judge had publicly humiliated her, something had snapped. She'd called her contact at the FBI from the courthouse bathroom during the morning recess, accelerating their timeline. The courtroom door opened. It was Mark Denholm, the defense attorney. That was something else. He said, sitting beside her, "How long have you been working on this?" "6 months." Karoline answered, starting to pack her files. "Ever since. My brother got 10 years for having 2 ounces of marijuana. A college kid, no priors." Mark nodded slowly. "I've defended dozens of clients in front of Thornton. Always wondered why the sentences were so harsh when the defendants chose Westland for their incarceration. He gets $5,000 for every inmate sentenced there," Karoline said flatly, "through a shell company that consults for the prison board." "Jesus," Mark ran his hand through his hair. "That's why my client today was looking at 15 years for a nonviolent offense." A commotion erupted in the hallway. They both rushed to see what was happening. Judge Thornton was being escorted out by the FBI agents, not in handcuffs but clearly under their control. His face was a mask of rage as courthouse employees, attorneys, and even other judges watched in stunned silence. Then he spotted Karoline. "You," he shouted, lunging toward her before the agents restrained him. "You planned this. You set me up." Karoline stepped forward, her voice clear in the hushed hallway. "No, Your Honor. You set yourself up the moment you decided your oath meant nothing, the moment you traded justice for profit." A crowd had gathered, including several news reporters who'd been covering other cases when word spread. "My brother was 19, she continued, emotion finally breaking through her professional facade. "He had his whole life ahead of him. How many others like him did you send away to line your pockets?" Judge Thornton's face contorted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends, powerful friends. This won't stick." But the look on the FBI agents' faces suggested otherwise. As they led the judge away, a court officer approached Karoline. "The chief judge would like to see you immediately." The walk to Chief Judge Miriam Hernandez's chambers felt like the longest of her career. Had she gone too far? Would her actions today end her career as a prosecutor? Chief Judge Hernandez was waiting, her expression unreadable. "Sit down, Ms. Leavitt." Karoline complied, preparing herself for the worst. "The FBI briefed me this morning," Judge Hernandez said. "They've been building this case for months, but they were waiting on financial records they couldn't access without raising suspicions." "I'm sorry for the disruption to the court, Your Honor," Karoline began. "Don't be." The chief judge's stern expression softened slightly. "What you did was unorthodox, but it may have prevented Judge Thornton from being tipped off. The FBI was concerned about evidence destruction." She slid a folder across her desk. "These are case numbers. All of Judge Thornton's sentencings to Westland over the past 5 years. Over 300 cases that may need review." Karoline stared at the folder, thinking of her brother, of all the families impacted. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Hernandez continued, The integrity of our justice system depends on accountability. No one is above the law, especially not those entrusted to uphold it. Back in the courthouse rotunda, reporters had gathered, cameras flashing as the disgraced judge was escorted to a waiting vehicle. Among the crowd was Karoline's mother, tears streaming down her face. They'd planned to meet for lunch, but she'd arrived early, just in time to witness history. "Does this mean Danny might come home?" she asked, gripping Karoline's hands. "Yes, Mom," Karoline answered, watching the police cars pull away. "I think a lot of people might be coming home." As the crowd dispersed and the day's normal courthouse business slowly resumed, Karoline knew this was just the beginning. There would be threats, attempts at retaliation, and a long road to reforming a system that had allowed such corruption to fester. But for the first time in 6 months, there was also hope, and that was worth everything.